This is Digging Deeper with At the Coalface, and this week's episode is proudly sponsored by Milec Engineering. From automation and electrical control systems to maintenance, manufacturing and project delivery, the Milec team helps mining and industrial operations find practical solutions to complex challenges. Find out more at milec.com.au. And here's your host, Jessica Rouse.
On this episode of Digging Deep with At the Coalface, someone I'm sure our listeners and certainly readers of Coalface know very, very well, Nick Jorrs, founder of Coal Australia, founder of Stanmore Coal, former exec chair of Bowen Coal, non-executive director of Ballymore Resources, and of course, beer enthusiast. Nick, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much for jumping on with us. Now, I know we all know you're founder of Coal Australia, but I thought we've never really spoken about how you got your start in mining and where it all sort of started for you in the industry. Can you take us back?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I was a civil engineer, probably not a very successful one, to be honest, but then I got sick of that, so I did. I went back to uni and studied an MBA, and then got into investment banking in Sydney for my sins. And then coming out of that, after about 8 years of that, I wanted to start a business. And a mate of mine, Jeremy Barlow, who's behind Barlow Yonker and quite a few other coal things, he said, "Why don't you start a coal business?" So it was kind of as simple as that. And I didn't really know too much about coal, but this was 2008, we started Stanmore Coal. I listed it in 2009 on the ASX. But we went and pegged some ground, and I like to joke about the fact that if you stood on a rock from our ground, you could almost see the Bowen Basin from where we were. So it wasn't quite prime territory, but we sort of swam upstream and kept buying more assets, and that culminated in buying Isaac Plains from Vale and Sumitomo in 2015, closed in 2016. At that point, the coal industry had sort of been going backwards since 2011, pretty tough times, as you'll recall. And so, we got that for what was a relative bargain. We paid $1 for it, and the vendors gave us $56 million to get started. So it was sort of a dream start, and within about 6 months, I think the coal price had gone back up to $300 from about 87 for met coal. So that went really well. I got out of that about a year later, and kind of tried to take a back seat and retire a little bit, but got itchy feet and got back into things. So been doing a few things since then.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, being in and out of various coal mining businesses, you saw the future in the industry and the value of being involved and the money that can be made and the assets and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's right. But I just love the industry. I mean, I love the people. I love the authenticity. I love what it does for Australia, right? What it does for Queensland and New South Wales in particular. But what it does for Australia is our second biggest export industry and supports so much in the way of jobs, but also, royalties and taxes. Come back to royalties because arguably they're too high in Queensland right now. But yeah, it's a really solid industry. It's what I call one of the productive industries in Australia. We're producing things that go into making steel, and everything comes from that, and energy, and keeping us warm and keeping the lights on. At the moment, I'm a bit cynical about where the government's going. We're investing a lot of taxpayer money in what I'd call unproductive industries, but it's all being subsidised out of industries like the coal sector. So for me, it's. I mean, that was the opportunity really with Coal Australia, was to sort of celebrate that rather than hiding our head in the sand about it.
Yeah, exactly. And what was the moment that you decided to go down that path of Coal Australia?
I think I'd been thinking for a while that the industry needed to I had this idea that if we put aside, I don't know, 10 cents a tonne or 20 cents a tonne or something, you could actually come up with a group that would educate people on coal, because it's very misunderstood as a commodity and as an industry, and people don't understand that they use it every day. Still Queensland, New South Wales, WA, Victoria, our cheapest energy is coming from coal. it is doing the hard work, keeping the lights on and keeping the export earnings and keeping the jobs going. So I think there was that in the back of my mind. I sort of pitched out to a couple of people and hadn't done much about it. And then we got sort of poleaxed with the royalties in Queensland in 1st of July 2022. It's funny, I was doing the CEO sleep out when the news came through, and now I'm doing it again tomorrow night because it comes every winter.
Yeah.
And I just remember reading the news and just being absolutely gobsmacked that they were putting, the Labor government, Queensland was putting royalties up to, as much as 40% of revenue, and making a bit of noise about it at the time, sort of finding my voice in these things. But eventually it annoyed me so much. And look, along the way, we ended up losing Bowen Coal, and it's, I mean, I'm not going to entirely blame royalties. There are other things at play, but we paid or incurred $120 million in royalties after startup before we made our first profit, and that's just impossible, right? So the guys that are kind of still going today in the basin are not many of them making money, or not too many of them, but they've got a balance sheet because they've been through better times in the past, so they can sort of ride it out a bit longer. But it was really that got me cranky, I suppose. I'm not a very cranky person, but I just sort of thought, well, we've got to do something here. So I had a couple of chats to people I knew in the industry, and then we sort of had a lunch in Brisbane where we got everybody together and said, look, I think it's time the coal industry stood up for itself again. It's been beaten up so badly by, foreign funded activists that are very well resourced. It's risking not only the industry, not only the jobs in the industry, but Australia's prosperity. And I can see us going very much down the wrong path on energy and everything else. And I'm very pleased to say I think that we've made a difference already, right? We've got we've got a pittance compared to our, the opponents of coal who are funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars to sort of shift the energy debate and try and, take us off coal exports and oil and gas and nuclear for that matter. But we're sort of fighting. We're back in the fight now, and I think it must be kind of a bit annoying and shocking for the activists because they sort of thought they'd dealt with us. Coal was dead, and we kind of reached back from the grave, tapped them on the shoulder, and said, "Hey, not so soon. We actually got a great story to tell here." So, Coal Australia for me has all been about bringing the industry together. It's easy to kind of have the things that divide us, and no doubt the industry should compete, very hard as they do commercially on sales and everything else. But when it comes to the things that are, existential threats, to coin a phrase, to the sector, we just need to stand together. And that's, a lot of it for me was the hardest part, to be honest. Getting people in a room was getting them to agree on the fact that, we're going to talk about thermal coal and met coal. A lot of the met coal guys were like, no, we've moved past thermal. That debate's lost. We don't want to kind of go back to it. But, the reality is it's all coal. People don't distinguish. The average punter in the street doesn't distinguish. I mean, I think before we did a bit of polling before we launched Coal Australia, and we polled Mackay, and it was something incredible. Like 80% of people didn't know the difference between thermal and met coal in Mackay, which is the biggest met coal export port in Australia, if not the world. So, we were sort of fighting the wrong battle, I think, and we were as an industry. It's not criticism; it's just where we'd landed. But we'd sort of we'd allowed ourselves to be balkanized, split up and divide and conquer, and so. The activists are very good at that. They come after one, they come after coal, and then gas says, oh, well, we're different to coal, or, they come after thermal coal and met coal tries to distinguish itself, and it just doesn't work right there. It's kind of like, negotiating with a crocodile, who are they going to eat last? A bit like Neville Chamberlain in World War II. You just can't appease your way out of this. These guys want to shut down. They're very clear they want to shut down our coal, oil and gas industries. That's their goal.
Yeah, I feel like Coal Australia has certainly made a difference, not only with the public perception who aren't in the industry at all, but also, the employees that I talk to on the ground. It's given them the confidence to actually step back and go, hey, actually, I can talk about coal and it's okay to talk about it. It's not scary. No one's going to judge me. And if they do, so what?
Yeah, it's so good to hear that, Jess, because that was really my goal was to say, that you could turn up to a barbecue, you could say I'm a coal miner,
Yeah.
I work in the coal sector, I work in a port or railway or whatever it is. And exactly that, you don't have to feel ashamed of it. I mean, it was just
No.
crazy the way the industry got to and the way we'd been made to feel as an industry. And so I'm really pleased to hear, you saying that you're seeing that coming through. I mean, I see it myself, but I'm in my own little kind of bubble. But I think, it's just a matter of giving ourselves permission to say we're doing a
Yeah.
great job here.
Exactly.
And mining does do a great job, right? And coal does a tremendous job for not just for the economy, not just for the people employed in it, for the knock-on jobs. Brisbane's the biggest coal town in Queensland. Half the city would shut down or virtually, without the coal industry.
Mm.
And New South Wales is similar, probably not quite to the same extent, but it relies on coal, biggest export. So yeah, we're doing great stuff. We should be proud of it. We should own it, and we should
Yeah.
talk up the successes, and the environmental successes and all the stuff that we're doing that's fantastic and cutting edge. And yeah, there's just no. We've been demonized as a sector, and if you track back to, I think 15, 16 years ago, we had the Australian Coal Association, which probably didn't do too much, but it had a voice for coal. And then as that disappeared, the activists started their campaign, and we just had nobody to stand up for the industry. And so I
Mm.
feel like, to some extent, everyone was just kind of beaten into submission. And it just needed a spark to or it needs a spark to just kind of get people going, yep, actually, I'm proud of what I do.
Yeah.
And I want to shout that from the rooftops.
Exactly. And I noticed a couple of weeks ago, Coal Australia has teamed up with Future Coal, another big advocator of the industry, not just here in Australia, but overseas. What was the thought process with that?
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, that had been brewing for a little while. And, I'm off the board of Coal Australia now, to be clear. I'm still in the background kind of helping out, but I'm off doing a few other things. But I think, um, that we met those guys. I met them a number of times. I was very interested in what they're doing. I think they've been on their own journey, to be honest.
Mm.
It was difficult to represent the coal industry. And, they went through a path, I think, where they were talking about abated coal and stuff. Was like, my view is we just got to be loud and proud, right?
Yeah.
We don't need to apologize for the fact that we're here. And I think they've come a long way. They were, my take on it is they were looking for sort of Australian representation because they were big in Asia and Europe
Yeah.
and other places. And so it made a lot of sense to have an alliance or a tie-up.
Mm.
And I'm very supportive of what they do. I mean, they do some great research, and some of the bigger ticket items. I mean, you can't solve everything on day one, right? But some of the things that annoy me that the activists still go on about is that, coal causes, hundreds of thousands or millions of deaths, worldwide. I mean, it's just, and if you actually look at the evidence, if you burn it in a tent or in a hut or something, in a third world country, the same as if you
Not
burn
good.
wood, it's
Yeah.
not good for you, right? But if you put it in a modern power station, and even our power stations in Australia, which are 25 to 50 years old, they're centralised, and you've got the scrubbers and the pollution equipment. We're not killing anybody.
Exactly.
And so it's just, they've captured the narrative and the language. And so that's sort of some of the stuff we've got to push back on. And that's something I think Future Coal or World Coal Association, I think they used to be called, they do very well. They've got a bit more kind of research heft than we do. I mean, Coal Australia is still a very small entity. I mean, Stuart runs it. He's doing a great job, and he's been fantastic getting his weekly newsletters out. And if you haven't signed up, your listeners, please get on to
Yes.
coalaustralia.com.au and sign up. And they're quite hilarious, actually. He doesn't mind taking the piss out of some of our opponents as well. So
That's great.
yeah. But no, it's good to see the coal industry, more broadly and more globally, sort of standing up for itself.
Exactly. And you've mentioned activists a couple of times. To be more exact, with a well-resourced activist. I've heard you talk about this at a couple of conferences in the past. But talk to us about the Sunrise Project.
Yeah, okay. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Sunrise sounds lovely. Look, this is one of my kind of bugbears, I guess, and it's a entity that was set up. So let me indulge me. I'll do a little bit of history. But back in 2011, there was a paper written by a guy called John Hepburn, who was a Greenpeace employee, And he was from Queensland originally, and I think he said his dad was a coal miner or something. I don't know, that's what he claimed. But anyway, he wrote the script, the blueprint to shut down the coal industry in Australia. It's called Stopping the Australian Coal Export Boom. And if you get online and Google that, you can still read it. It's in the Queensland Parliament archives, actually. But yeah, Stopping the Australian Coal Export Boom. And that set out a very comprehensive plan. I don't know, it's probably 15 pages, 20 pages of what they would do in the Hunter Valley, in other parts of Australia, in Queensland, and how they would basically, and some of the words are quite telling, right? It was leaked, so we know what they said, but they wanted to change the story of coal from being the backbone of the economy, which if you cast your mind back to 2011, that's kind of what it was, right? People thought, and prior to that, people thought coal was a good thing. They want to change it from being the backbone of the economy and the nation to being a polluting, toxic substance that's basically, going to destroy the climate and a few other things. So, they set out explicitly in this paper to increase the cost of coal. So, coal royalties is one thing they've been cheering for through their advocate groups to increase those. Make finance difficult to access, make insurance difficult to access, change the narrative, change the public narrative. They had a series of goals that all sort of worked. The words they used were they wanted a series of activist groups. So they infiltrated, or let's say they funded things like Queensland Conservation Council. Mackay Conservation Group is an original signatory to the paper. Get Up, Lock the Gate, they were part of the paper. Environmental Defenders Office. But then, more esoteric ones, like through a intermediary called Climate Action Network Australia, they fund a whole bunch of people. It's on their website, right? And it's like, pick a profession. It's like doctors for climate action, vets for climate action, they'll have orthodontists for climate action next, I'm sure. Surfers for the environment, farmers for the environment, all this sort of stuff, right? And they're all, I don't know, some of them probably started with the right intentions or whatever, but the common theme is that all they will talk about is climate crisis and how bad coal, oil and gas are, right? And so and their goal, if you get on their websites, is to stop the coal, oil and gas industry. So, what gets me is that they've given up on the conservation fight. So if you look at, and there's a lot of evidence now, it's been in various newspapers that you can see what some of the rollout of the renewables is doing to not just the kind of virgin remnant forests on, in Queensland and elsewhere, but also to our productive food bowls where this and the transmission you've got to build is just ripping through them, ripping farmers apart, ripping families apart, and it's expensive. And so, but these guys who are meant to be our environmental watchdogs have totally dropped the ball on that. So, there's tens of thousands of hectares, literally, of koala territory and sugar gliders and other things getting torn up with excavators. I'm not saying that mining industry has no impact; it absolutely does. But because of the energy density of coal, if you start energy density, sort of nuclear is the best, then sort of gas and coal, and the worst is the renewables because they take up so much space. They're so energy diffuse. So what that does, it impacts a lot more people, impacts a lot more land, impacts a lot more farmers, impacts a lot more of the natural environment. But yeah, these guys at the Activist Fund have sort of neglected them, and they've sort of just moved entirely against coal, oil and gas projects and trying to stop nuclear. And that's ironic, right? Because nuclear has no emissions. So if you really wanted to stop, prevent a climate crisis, if that's what you thought was happening, you wouldn't stop nuclear, right? It just doesn't make any sense. But they're all funded. The funding's pretty opaque, but we do know some of the funders are billionaires, like Mike Cannon-Brookes funds them. Offshore billionaires, Michael Bloomberg, some of the big kind of family office institutions are still around, like the Hewlett Foundation, the Packard Foundation. These guys have been sort of captured by people, and they distribute money to Sunrise. They pulled in nearly $350 million in the last 6 years, which is a tremendous amount of money, right? I think
Yeah.
280 of that's gone into the Australian energy ecosystem and funded all these kind of things that look like grassroots organisations, or they look like conservation groups,
Mm.
but their one goal is to stop coal, oil, and gas. And so they fund the court cases, they fund all the delays, all that sort of stuff, and they're not transparent about where most of the money comes from. Who knows, right? A lot of it comes from offshore. We don't know. Or they're foreign, actors, foreign governments. They say they don't take money from foreign governments, but who knows who wants to influence our energy policy, stop our coal and gas exports. What I do know is that other countries have benefited at the expense of Australia. So,
Yeah.
if you look back to 2011 to today, I mean, Australians' coal production is pretty much the same. It's coming off now. I think Andy Boyd made the point, we're off 30 million tonnes in Queensland, coke and coal exports, with taxes, royalties, and other costs. But we're reasonably flat from 2011 to today. But Indonesia's coal production from say 2010 to today has tripled. Right? So, Mongolia's come from nothing to 70, 80 million tonnes a year. China's massively increased because what they haven't done, they've stopped the Australian coal export boom, but they haven't stopped the coal boom. Right? So every year the IEA comes out and says this is the peak year for coal. It's going to come down again next year. It never does. Right? Every year is another world record demand. Yeah, we'll see where it keeps going. But so far, we've had world record after world record of demand. We've just decided not to supply it. So what that means is 300 million tonnes of projects, which were identified in its paper in 2011 by Sunrise, or what became the Sunrise Project. More than that, much more than that, has come onto the global coal market. It just hasn't come out of Australia. If you think about 300 million tonnes of exports, at $100 or $200 a tonne, you're talking about, $30 billion, $60 billion worth of exports, so many jobs, so much taxes, so many royalties, so much prosperity that could have come to Australia that's all gone somewhere else. And as we say, we do have the highest, environmental standards and labour standards and everything else.
That's it. I mean, is it that do the activists just not want to accept that if countries that are in poverty, that we've helped pull out of poverty with our reliable, excellent, cheap coal, just because you stop it here, they're going to go to another country, get coal from somewhere else, which isn't as efficient. You're going to be burning 3 times as much possibly compared to how much Australian coal you'd be burning, which is going to increase the emissions around the world anyway. The amount of emissions that we put out in Australia are tiny compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's negligible. And I mean, I think a couple of things there. Look, the Chinese are burning, basically crap, mud, 1,800 kilocal type stuff. They build ultra supercritical power plants. They build 1 or 2 of them a week.
Exactly.
We built our last one 25 years ago in Australia. So we are, we're not even a rounding error in the whole global emissions thing. And I think the argument of the activists was, we need to lead the way, right? We need to show people what we can do. But it's not a very fun game when you're making yourself entirely uncompetitive and the rest of the world is going in the other direction. Now you've got the US turned around. Even the UK is, I think, going to turn around, right? Tony Blair's come out and said net zero is going to kill us. Watch that closely. Canada's turned around even under the new PM there, who was like a climate guru and head of the Reserve Bank or the Bank of England. And he's opening up oil pipelines and as much stuff as he can do to get their economy going. So, and I think just to put some context around what we're doing, I put a lot of posts on LinkedIn. If you readers or viewers are interested, get onto it.
Entertaining. Go and have a look.
There's some interesting stuff there, I think. But I put one about the expansion of Hale Creek, which is a met coal mine in Queensland owned by Glencore. And I think, if my memory serves me right, you've got all the activist groups, or 3 of them. I think it's Whitsunday Conservation Council, Mackay Conservation Group, and Lock the Gate as well. And they've come out and said what they say on all of these things. This is going to cause massive global warming, and it's going to we're all going to fry, and it's going to be more droughts and all this sort of stuff, right? None of which is really based on any science at all. But then if you do a track back to the science, and which I do, right, because I'm a bit of a pedant with this stuff, and so read the IPCC reports, work out their modelling. The warming that would result from that, if you believe their modelling, which is this is the preeminent alleged authority on climate change. I think it's like 4 zeros and then a 1, so like 5 zeros, 0.000001 degree of warming would come from Howell Creek. And they've said this is going to bring on bushfires and, pestilence and plagues and whatever else it's going to do. So they've just divorced the sort of public narrative and debate from anything that approximates a fact. And being an engineer or a lapsed engineer, I'm a bit of a sucker for facts. I know they don't really sell, but I just like to bring the debate back to facts and say, well, prove I'm wrong, demonstrate that your point is right.
Exactly. And we need those facts out there. I mean, we're seeing a similar thing. You got Howell Creek up there with Hunter Valley Operations here in the Hunter Valley. They're not trying to create a new coal mine. They're just trying to extend and dig a little bit more out of where they have already mined, and also just not touch some of the land that they already have. But the lack of facts in the community, even around that project, is nuts.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's creeping in now, you see it in that, and you see it in Mac Energy's extension in New South Wales, is this, and it's gone through the court, I think federal court, but it's going through at the moment. But it's the Scope 3 emissions idea, right? So, a tiny fraction of the emissions that we create here, digging it up, transporting it, whatever, the vast bulk, 90% of them are where the coal is burnt. And I did put a post on this actually showing that, or likening it to, we sell coal to Japan, Korea, China. It's like saying to the Japanese, we're not going to sell them wheat anymore. Well, if we're selling them wheat and then we count the emissions from the wheat, from them putting it in the oven, we count that here, and then they have to count it there as well. It's a massive case of double counting. And, it's like we've convinced ourselves that if we stop selling Japan wheat, they'll stop making bread. We stop selling coal, they'll turn their lights off. They're not going to do that. They're not going to stop their steel blast furnaces. So, there's this whole activist-led kind of court stuff going on at the moment that just needs to be really a spotlight shone on it and demonstrate that it's not based on science or facts. It's based on dogma and, ideology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's talk about government too. Obviously, that plays a role in all these approvals and whatnot. What are your thoughts on I'm probably going to get it wrong, the Net Zero Energy Authority?
Oh, in New South Wales. Yeah, look, I haven't delved into it too much, but I think, what I understand of it is it is kind of stacked with activists.
It's meant to be independent.
Sympathetic to the cause. So, I don't even know who created it, but New South Wales has been through some troubled times, right? They had Matt Keane as the energy minister as a Liberal, and he's probably the worst offender in terms of destroying our energy system. So, it just seems to be a sort of government quango that's designed to, hamper the coal industry and the gas industry, and to the extent we've still got an oil industry, that as well. So, there's a whole series of these guys, right? Like the Environmental Defender's Office is the same. I think Queensland stopped funding it, but I think, Feds still fund it, and I think New South Wales might still fund it. These are the guys designed to stop projects, to challenge projects that are in the national interest, and they're funded by our governments. It's kind of hard to believe. I don't think, the governments of Saudi Arabia, America, Mongolia, anywhere else that's producing a lot of energy, funding the activists that try and stop the projects that want to produce the energy. It's kind of bizarre, right? If you think about it, you'll do your head in. Just unbelievable.
That's it. And you mentioned royalties up in Queensland briefly before. What's the state of play on the ground at the moment? Obviously, we've seen lots of movement with BMA having to cut jobs, other companies talking about it too, cutting back.
Yeah, it's in an uneasy kind of, I don't know, it's not really moving at the moment. This is, look, it came about under Labor government. Cameron Dick, Stephen Miles put these royalties in without consultation, right? The highest in the world, years ago, 20, 30, 40% of revenue. It's tiered, so you don't get that on all your revenue, but you get it on your incremental revenue. And so what's happened now, the last numbers I did, I think it's taking on average 19% out of revenue, which is, compared to what it is in New South Wales 11 or something. It's a big chunk, right? It's a big chunk before you pay your wages, before you pay, any of your other costs, your suppliers, any of that sort of stuff, right? Your materials bill, equipment. And it's based on revenue, not on profit. And that's really the problem, is that we had a royalties scheme in Queensland that was at 7%, and they bumped it up, put in sort of 10% and 12.5% rates. And then they backed on 15 and 20 and 30 and 40. But the 20, 30 and 40 was sold to us by Cameron Dick and the Labor government as being super profits. There'd be windfall taxes, right? So only when the price above 300 Aussies, which is, traditionally been a tremendous price for met coal, would you pay that? Well, that sounds good, but what's happened now, of course, is that the price is above 300 Aussies for BHP and Anglo. They're producing the best, hard coking coal in the world. So they're incurring these things and are making losses. I mean, BHP made, I don't know, 100 million last year, but not much in the scheme of what they're putting out there. But Anglo lost money, right? And if you go through, I've been through the list again. It's all on LinkedIn. There's in my calcs about 17 mines that are where the companies are losing money at the moment.
Yeah.
That's a big chunk. I think it's like 32% of the industry. Some of them don't disclose, so you've got to kind of make a bit of an estimate. But the ones that we do know, there's I think 17. 2 have already shut, Bowen shut. Obviously, that was my entity. Vitronite's now gone into receivership. Some of them are they're very close to the line. So, this has to be fixed for the sake of Queensland and for the sake of Australia. But it's politically difficult. And I don't want to get too political, but it was deliberately made that way by the Labor government, the last Labor government in Queensland. They put up a bill called Keep It in the Bank bill, which meant, because coal, sorry, I'm getting excited. Let me calm down. But I think coal has got to this point where it's been so demonized that it's a political bonus for people, and it was seen as politically positive to the former Labor government in Queensland to tax it out of existence, right? So they then put this massive tax on them. They said, we're going to fund 50-cent bus fares, $1,000 off your electricity bill, all these sort of giveaways to make people kind of want to hang on to that tax. And then, the industry can't bear that, can't make money. I mean, you can't keep paying taxes like that when you're losing money. These companies are not charities. I mean, they made some money in 2022 when the price spiked in the last boom, but this is a boom bust sort of business, and you lose money. And right now they're paying last year 5.5 billion in royalties, and on my numbers, the industry didn't make any money. So half loss, half gain, if you like. But it's those are the conditions that we'll see more mines shut, more jobs lost, and I think people in southeast Queensland are oblivious to this, right? They don't realise that their economy is driven by mining and coal in particular, and whether it's there might be a lawyer, an accountant, or a barista, or anybody, but all those knock-on sort of jobs that come from engineering, all that stuff that's based in Brisbane, and they go down and they have a coffee. They'll spend money, at the local night owl or whatever. If they don't have jobs, they don't spend the money. So it's a big issue for Queensland. It needs to be fixed, but it's been entirely politicised. And what I was going to say is they put forward the previous government put forward a Keep It in the Bank bill, which passed. And state of the debate at the time, the Libs, I think, waved it through, right? They didn't want to take it on at the time either. But what that means is that Queensland is a unicameral system, so there's only one house, there's no Senate, basically. So normally a government can just change things, or they can change things by regulation or whatever. They've now put this law in that says, well, you actually have to go back for a vote in the House of Parliament to change the royalty settings. So they've really made it very political, and that's around, chasing votes in the southeast where people have had this view that coal is bad. That's turning, though. I'm really pleased to see that is turning, and we've done some polling on that, and it's starting to shift. Like, we are moving the dial. The ship is starting to turn off its axis, tilt off its axis, just turn around a little bit, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so frustrating that an industry that provides something that is vital to our country gets knocked from this way and that way. I mean, we saw down here at Muswellbrook Shire Council upped their rates just for mining companies. Went to IPART and it got approved. So the mining companies are now paying even more money to council because council, in their words, the mines aren't going to be here forever. Where's all the money going to come from that goes to community projects and fixing roads and blah, 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 blah. Like, the mines aren't shutting tomorrow. And also, how are they going to be putting money into the community if you're asking for even more money in rates?
Yeah, absolutely. And same with royalties up here, right? You've seen a lot less money going to communities from mining companies because they don't have the money, right? They're losing money. It's all going to the state government, which is, ironically, this was sold as being putting more money in central Queensland. It's ripping the guts out of central Queensland. And if anything, the money finds its way into southeast Queensland. But the real irony for me, I'm not sure if you've got any Victorian listeners, but I used to live there actually, so I'll declare that I'm not biased against Victorians. But what happened was when Queensland jacked their royalties up, the Federal Grants Commission, which allocates the GST revenue, so GST doesn't go to the state it's earned in, right? It's given to on this kind of opaque formula and stuff, where this Grants Commission thinks that people need it the most, right? So they explicitly said to Queensland, we'll rip $5 billion off of you because you've jacked your royalties up. You can raise more money through that. And they gave that primarily to Victoria, but also other states. So it's like the money's not even going to Queensland. You're ripping the guts out. You're taking, you're risking 27,000 direct jobs and a whole heap of like hundreds of thousands of indirect jobs to basically take the money, give it to Victoria. And as I said in another post, what do they spend it on? Well, there was like $600 million on the Glasgow Olympics, which, they had the Commonwealth Games, which was meant to be in Melbourne. They cancelled it, and then they paid money to Glasgow to hold it. There's $1.1 billion on a tunnel they cancelled when they came into power. There's like 200 million on offshore wind farms, which will never happen, in my lifetime or yours, because the economics are too hard. And they're building a statue of Dan Andrews. I mean, that is not. If you ask the average person, even in southeast Queensland, did they want their royalty money to go to build a statue of Dan Andrews in Victoria? I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is, right? They're not going to be happy about that.
Not at all.
But so, here's me kind of blasting this stuff out in the ether on LinkedIn and just trying to get the messages out there, because it's kind of, it'd be funny if it wasn't so serious, right? It's just like,
exactly.
They're buggering the country entirely.
Yeah. While we're on politics, One Nation's certainly a very popular topic of conversation at the moment. I was saying to you earlier, Pauline Hanson at the National Press Club was very, very interesting today. Do you think it's a good thing they're getting traction for the industry? Do you think One Nation would be good for coal?
I do, actually. I honestly do. And look, and I don't have, like, people may think I'm overly political. I'm not really. Like, I just want the outcome. I just want to see the industry prosper. And, whoever's going to deliver that to me, and not just the coal industry, right? It's not that one-dimensional. Like, I want to see our energy system reliable and affordable. I want to see Australia prospering. I want to see us getting rid of, like, our carbon tax in the safeguard mechanism, which just ratchets up every 5% a year. Nobody talks about it. Nobody knows about it. There's a carbon tax on all our major exports like coal. I want to see prosperity and productivity increase, right? And so, whoever's going to do that, I think I'll support. I think it's really interesting because, before the last election, I think the last federal election, I think the Libs they've been scared, right? I mean, they've been scared to tackle the big issues, and it's now kind of Matt Canavan coming in and Angus Taylor that have kind of grasped the nettle and said, yeah, we get this, right? The people don't want this rapid energy transition that's going to drive our bills through the roof. I mean, we did some polling before the last election, seat by seat, and it was so fascinating because even in McMahon, which is Chris Bowen, the climate and energy minister's seat in Western Sydney, 83% of people in his seat wanted to use more coal to bring their power bills down.
There you go.
So, and we did the same in one of the Teal seats in Sydney, and it was not a dissimilar result, right? I expected this in Central Queensland and Hunter Valley, but people are onto it, right? People are smarter than the politicians give them credit for. They know they've been sold a pup. They know we're heading down the gurgler economically. They don't want to transition our energy system into unreliable wind and solar as quickly as what's being done. And so I think, you've just got to kind of give those people a voice. So I think the Liberals were probably scared to do that and have been for a while. I mean, the two elections they lost, the last election they won, 2019, was the one, if you recall, when Bob Brown and his caravan of love went up to Claremont and got their ass kicked and booted out of coal country, and coal became an election issue, and Morrison won it. But then after that, they signed up to net zero, and since then they've just lost elections. So now they've come off. It'll be very interesting to see what they do. But in the meantime, I think where they've been kind of trying to, outflank Labor to the left and Greens to the left, which is just physically impossible, I think. One Nation's kind of stolen the march, and they've come and taken that ground that's not just it's not just regions, it's also suburbs, right? And it's regular people, right? And it's what, Howard's battlers or whatever you want to call, just ordinary people like you and I, or like ordinary people in the street. It's these are the people who don't, they don't want to disrupt their standard of living. They understand what energy gives them intuitively, even if not in detail. But So I think One Nation is just demonstrating, and you see it around the world, right? Nigel Farage and obviously Donald Trump, and in Italy as well, and other places where there's a pushback against all of this kind of shift to the hard left, I think. A bit more to go in Australia, but it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out, who ends up in power. But if you remember, and coming out of the federal election, everyone's going, "Oh, this is such a massive majority for Labor that there's no way they can lose it in one term," right? And I'm like, well, let's see. And now it's sort of looking like, well, okay, Pauline's making some inroads. I think the Libs may be getting their act together. They certainly seem to be kind of making better noises. Matt Canavan's been fantastic for the Nat, I think, to kind of head them in the right direction. But however it ends up, right, if One Nation ends up with a balance of power in the Senate or something instead of the Teals or the Greens, that'd be a great outcome, right, for Australia and for our industry. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And nuclear is certainly something that they're talking about as well as coal.
Yeah, and so they should, right? I mean, again, go back to the maths. I mean, we're tying ourselves in knots to shut down our coal-fired power plants in Australia. Your lawn, at this rate, is going to shut in 2 years' time, 2028. Victoria, the lights are going to go out. And by the way, South Australia as well, because they're on a big extension lead to Victoria's brown coal in Gippsland that nobody talks about, because they're all renewable, but they're not, right? When the sun goes down and the wind don't blow, they're on the coal. So that's going to see the lights go out there. That was meant to be replaced with offshore wind. That is not happening. I mean, even the best case scenario is now like 2033, 34, but the reality is the economics are so fixed against that. Gippsland's probably the only place in Australia you could possibly do it, because it's the only place where they're not floating. You can actually put them on the seabed, but they're still so expensive. They don't last very long, as they're finding out in the UK. And they're intermittent. They only run about a third of the day. So you need 3 times as much of them, and then you've got to shift them in time with batteries and everything else. So, that's, I think, and then you look at New South Wales, right? Raring's due to shut. Bayswater's only got a few years left.
Yeah.
Who knows how long Vales Point will last? Mount Piper's running out of coal. Without those things, any one of those, New South Wales is buggered. It's already very expensive because, unlike Victoria and a lot of Queensland, which has mine mouth dedicated supply, which is still coal, it's still cheap, cheap coal. New South Wales doesn't have that, largely due to planning in New South Wales, where they, they had a mine they could have developed, and they decided to disband that. which would have provided cheap coal. But now it's effectively paying export price parity, right? So if you look at Newcastle prices now at close to 150 US, and you divide that, so that's Aussies, whatever it is, 220, can't do the math, something. Divide that by how much energy you get. It's roughly 24 gigajoules a kilo. So that's about it's about $9 a gigajoule, right? $8 or $9 a gigajoule, which is the same as gas. So New South Wales coal is the same as gas price in Australia at the moment. So, and then Queensland's is better because it's still got cheap coal. Victoria's got very cheap coal, right? I mean, it's coming out like 70 cents a gigajoule or something. It's ridiculously cheap. But Australia has, I mean, I digress a bit, but on an energy front, like we've got the answer sitting right under our feet, right? We've got the uranium,
That's exactly
we've got
right.
the coal, we've got the gas, we've got the oil we haven't looked for a long time. And it's cheap. I mean, by the time you put this stuff from New South Wales, you put it on a ship, take it to Japan, Korea, China, you add another $1 a gigajoule. You know, that their energy is expensive. It's always going to be that way. We should be the energy superpower, building data centers and all the stuff that we want to build, future industries, new factories, plastics factories that are shutting down because of expensive energy. They should be here.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to make one other point that, again, if you look at, if we kept our coal-fired power plants going until 2050, and again, you apply the same, it's like 0.45 of a degree per trillion tons of carbon dioxide that's emitted. You said how much global warming would result from keeping all our coal-fired power plants going until 2050. It's like 0.0015 of a degree. And so you could bring in nuclear on 2050 or, in the lead up to that. The reason we don't have nuclear is because in the 70s after the oil shock, we didn't, we had so much cheap coal, so we didn't need it.
Yeah.
But you could definitely bring in nuclear as the West starts to learn how to build it again. We haven't, the US, they haven't built one forever. And the first of a kind is always expensive. But as we start to learn how to do that, it'll become much more cheaper.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's plenty of energy options for Australia. We just turn our back on all the cheap, good ones.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, as I think Chris Uhlmann had it in his presentation, that when we were at the APCC conference, and I've had Chris on the podcast this year as well, Australia was built on the back of fossil fuels, whether it was coal, whether it was oil, whether it was gas. That's where our wealth came from. Take that away, what have we got? Obviously ag and, wheat and all of that sort of thing, but come on.
Well, you don't really, because the fertilizers, you don't have the diesel to kind of drive them around. I mean, you also lose all your medicines and your plastics, and you had a great slide down at that Steph's conference, actually, just showing everything you walk away from if you walk away from fossil fuels, and it's pretty much everything we use in modern day life, right? The microphone you're using, the clothes you wear, you walk away from all of that. Because they're all based on hydrocarbons or fossil fuels, as they like to call them.
The phone I used to scroll Nick Jorrs' LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it is kind of, it sounds weird, but it's going back to the dark ages, right? You end up living in the caves if that's what you want to turn your back on. And Australia is still, 91% of our primary energy, so not just electricity, but everything we use, right? The diesel we put in the farm equipment and the mining trucks, the petrol you put in your cars, the gas, the heating we use in our homes, lots of 91% of that comes from coal, oil, and gas. And the actors want to shut that down, tomorrow, ASAP. And all the TEALs are on record. I've got a little video of them talking about we need to shut down coal and gas exports, right? We need to shut that down. It's like, well, like Japan and Korea, China, all our customers, they're not going off them, right? They've realized that they can't go off them. You're just going to bankrupt the country is what you're going to do, and very quickly. And that's what's happening at the moment. But it can all be turned around pretty quickly, right? If you just cut the subsidies to zero and you allowed all the energy sources to play on their own merits, the market would sort it out, right? I'd build a coal-fired power plant in Australia. I absolutely would.
Yeah. I'll help you.
Thank you. Great. We can turn the first sod. Because it makes economic sense, right? The difficulty is today is you've got the solar market that's kind of gouged out the midday, so it's more of a lumpy market. But with increases in load, which we're seeing now in the West, right? Data centers coming in, electrifying things that people want to seem to electrify everything. electricity load increases. So that's all doable. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, what would be the next major plant built in Australia? Depending on the government, could be coal.
Yeah,
We got plenty of it, and it's cheap,
exactly.
right? The whole Surat Basin in Queensland, the Galilee Basin, that's like $1.50 a gigajoule. It's dirt cheap, um, and it's good quality coal.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we really want to be an energy powerhouse, we should stop turning our backs on all of that. Yeah, we should do all the environmental studies and everything else, and we should be leading the world in environmental stuff, which we do. But let's not just kind of turn our nose up on it because we don't like it.
Yeah, I think just a random side note. I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize how much environment stuff and how passionate people who work in mine sites who are enviros actually are about the environment and rehab, but also passionate about the coal industry and keeping that around. I mean, it's certainly not the case that coal wants nothing to do with the environment or doesn't want to be kind to the environment. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Oh, absolutely. And people, like, on the sites I've been involved in, yeah, people work very hard to minimize the footprint and everything else. And like I said, it comes back to sort of energy density, right? Like, you've got to
Yeah,
disrupt a certain amount of ground and land to have our modern lifestyle. That's just the way it is. If you
that's
want
it.
to minimize that, you go nuclear every week, right? You'd mine uranium. We'd be still mining in the Northern Territory at Ranger. Um, we'd still be doing that, and we'd be building coal-fired power plants. And you might, I think Pauline said today, just start with one. I agree with that, actually. Why do seven? We start with one.
Yeah,
As the West starts to kind of get the technology back. But yeah, no, look, the enviros are really good, and the coal sector in Australia is, in fact, the whole mining sector is leading the world
100%.
in its environmental footprint, minimising all of that. So yeah, I'm, and this is the irony of it, right? Like, not only by shutting down the Australian coal export boom, not only do those activists, strip so much prosperity out of the country, so many jobs, so many taxes, so many royalties, but they've replaced that coal from places that don't have the same environmental standards as us and don't have the same quality of coal. So as you say, the emissions are higher. It's been a massive own goal, like economic own goal for Australia, but it actually hasn't stopped the global coal boom. It's actually just kind of shifted it offshore, and all
Yeah,
these jobs are gone. Like, what an absolute tragedy. You can't make this stuff up.
exactly.
Um, but up until recently, it's been, well, it probably still is in some sections. Like, my old boss or chairman, Neville Snedden, used to say to me that, and he worked at Rio and Anglo and Place, he said, you go to London and, these big companies, they just want to kind of get rid of coal because it's not a polite cocktail party, sort of dinner party conversation, right? And shutting down coal was, and it is, and so the billionaires have been funneling money into it. But I think that's there's going to be a point where they realise, hang on, we've absolutely buggered Australia,
Mm.
the economy, and people are going to be asking them hard questions. Say, well, why are you funding, $350 million over 6 years in the Sunrise project to destroy our economy? Like, is that really what you want to do? So I think that, the flip side of kind of creating pride in the coal industry through Coal Australia and other things, and, Coalface and what you guys are doing, is that people start to ask questions about, well, why are we doing these alternatives? And I think it's, a lot of virtue signaling or virtue strutting was the latest version of that I heard with billionaires and others that like to kind of, Twiggy's a great one for that, right? Green hydrogen. I mean, green hydrogen is never, ever going to be economic, ever, right? It is just such a sink of government money. He's taken a bunch of it. He's not giving it back to Queensland government now by the look of it. I don't want him to sue me, by the way, but he's got deeper pockets than me. But I think, it's just such a scam, right? I mean, sorry, I'm ranting, but I think I said I got invited to one of those pre-QRC lunches,
Yeah.
State of the Nation type things a few years ago, and I said, and Ian McFarlane was there, he was running the QRC at the time, and I told him a story about one of my, I was in front of an audience, one of my mates in the coal industry, long-term coal guy, and he said to me, Nick, you got to get into green hydrogen. It's fantastic. You make a lot of money. I'm like, well, but it doesn't make any sense economically. Like, you lose so much energy on the way through on the round trip losses that it just can never work. And he's like, oh, no, I mean, consulting, get into consulting. You make a lot of money out of consulting. I'm like, that's fine. But that's one of the problems we got, right? Everyone's on the gravy train. Like everyone's kind of making money out of this stuff, and so they don't want to necessarily give it away. The big accounting firms, the lawyers, they're all making money out of it, right? I mean, you imagine you've got to count every emission you've got, and you've got to, now we're going to impose on our businesses that they've got to count all their emissions, and all the suppliers are going to have to count all their emissions. I mean, it's horrendous. The cost is horrendous. So, I think that sort of virtue signaling, trying to pass through the eye of a needle, get to heaven is less going to be less of a thing going forward. That's just my kind of optimistic view, I guess. Yeah.
We love an optimistic view.
I'm a born optimist. Is one of my many flaws, but they kind of they knock you down. You just got to keep getting up again.
Yeah, that's it.
But Nick, I think also, so if I could say one more thing, it's incumbent on all of us, right? Like, I know people think I'm a loudmouth. I actually wasn't born a loudmouth. I was kind of an unassuming little kid, right? Quite
That's
shy.
Surprising.
I know, people don't believe that was true. But I just got sick of it, right? I got sick of it. Yeah. So, well, if no one else is going to talk about it, I'm going to talk about it. But I think this is the point. I was actually having a conversation with a lady today who's in Queensland, and she's been working on energy policy for like renewables, energies, and all that sort of stuff. But she knows this stuff doesn't work, right? And so she's like, I want to break that kind of science. I want to get out. And I said, it's actually very liberating, right? Like coming out and publicly and saying, that you're questioning, or you just want to have a debate on the facts. And so I think, it's on all of us to do that, right? All your listeners to sign up to Coal Australia. If your employer or if you've got a business that benefits from the coal industry, come and talk to us. Come and talk to Steph Black or myself or Stephen Boxall about signing up as an associate member, right? Like you get benefits out of all of that, and you can come to functions, all that sort of stuff, but also you're putting a bit back in the tin, right? If you cast your mind back to, the Adani campaign, which was a shocker, right? And that really was, I think, part of the turning point, right? When Matt Canavan and those guys went up there and booted Bob Brown out of Claremont. And, there was a big campaign and by Sunrise and their market forces, all their kind of other entities that are all funded by this dark offshore money, to shame all the suppliers, right? So if you were an engineering company and you were doing design work on the rail line for Adani, or you were, a construction company, you're going to be doing work, they would call you out publicly and say, right, this is not okay. You're working for a coal company, a coal mine. So, we don't need to go to that extent, but I think we do need to, as an industry, sort of, stand up for ourselves. And I would say all those suppliers, right, that rely on the coal industry, and that goes all the way through Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, parts of WA, should be coming and having a chat to Coal Australia and say, well, how can we help? Like, how can we get involved in this? How can we find our voice? Because the worm has turned and we're no longer beaten down, by a big activist stick. We're standing up for ourselves. Like I said, I'm sure it's annoying the hell out of them, but it is what it is, right? We've got a fantastic, tremendous industry that we should be proud of. We should be so proud of the workers that are putting this coal into our power stations and creating cheap power, into steel mills here and overseas, and as you said, dragging, literally millions of people out of poverty with cheap energy. We should be so proud of them, and we are. So, join the community. I think Coal Australia's got 135,000 people now signed up, which is just tremendous, right? And so you get a weekly newsletter from, we don't hassle you too much. Stu gives you a weekly newsletter for a few laughs and a few facts. And at times we'll probably do some more with those people and try and ask people if they want to get more involved in stuff. I mean, we did one, I think, around some approvals in New South Wales. But it's just get involved, get active, arm yourself with facts. I know the guys are working on a coal annual thing, which is going to have a whole heap of information. It's going to be really digestible. And so just be able to say, okay, when I go to the barbecue and someone says, well, you're a climate killer, baby killer, whatever you're accused of, you've actually got the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 facts that you can kind of go straight to and quote back to them. So, I just encourage everybody to kind of, get a bit more involved. Be brave. It's a lot more fun than you might think it is to get out there and actually make these points and be confident that you're standing up for your industry and standing up for your country.
Exactly. Get some merch. Wear it proud. I always remember.
Yeah, like one of these ones.
Yeah.
I got hats, I got everything. I mean, just absolutely.
I think it must have been
If
the
you're in
last.
Queensland, am I allowed to do this? Is cross-pollination. Try one of these.
And do it.
We got Queensland Beer Co, the best mid-strength beer out there.
You have to send me some.
Yeah, I will. It's actually Australian-owned, Queensland-owned.
Love it.
Most of our beers owned offshore now, like 90% of it, but we're Australian-owned. We've got, this might upset your New South Wales listeners, but we've got Wally Lewis, Darren Lockyer, Cam Smith and JT as our legends, ambassadors who are promoting the beer, and they're shareholders as well in the business. So it's a great tasting drink. You can drink it all afternoon if you're that way inclined, like I am. Top drop. So get into it.
I love it. That's so good. We're going to put the link to Coal Australia's website on the bio. We might even pop your Queensland Beer Co.
Oh, why don't you do that? That'd be so fun, Jess. Yeah, perfect.
I'll do that for you. Nick, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Really great to chat, Jess. And keep up the good work you're doing and keep up the fight.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Digging Deeper with At the Coalface. You can download more episodes of the podcast on all your favourite podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, also on YouTube, Amazon Music, all the usual places. Make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear what you thought. And if you do have a story idea or something you'd like us to talk about on the podcast, please send me an email, jess@thecoalface.net.au. I'd love to hear from you. And we'll be back next time for another episode of Digging Deeper with